Wait a second. No, he
I'm
has
sorry,
not.
I'm wrong.
You got the
My bad.
you got the wrong little
Apologies.
man, James.
My bad. I confused him with Gary Coleman.
What you talking about, Willis? He's the one that passed.
Apologies. Gary Coleman. My fault. My fault. I'm sorry, Mr. Lewis. I'm sorry.
I will tell you what.
If you're listening,
the crazy part is Emmanuel Lewis is 48 years old and still looks like he could play the part of a 10-year-old. So
yes.
I mean, listen, you got that going for you, Mr. Lewis. Seriously, Emmanuel Lewis should induct Alex Karras into the Hall of Fame and call him Mr. Papadopoulos.
Oh, goodness gracious. And, you know, people of my generation, that's probably all they know Alex Karras for is being George Papadopoulos on Webster. We weren't alive or around to see him play. But, unfortunately, when you talk to some of the great players from his era, they regard him as the dirtiest player to ever play football.
Isn't that
Not
crazy?
so much his greatness. So I'm trying to figure out how he made this Centennial ballot when all of his peers from that era don't regard him as a great. They regard him as the dirtiest player to play the game. I don't understand. I saw his name. I was like, wait, is that a typo? Is that for real?
By the way, that's Ted Karras's uncle. Ted Karras, the Patriot center,
lineman,
who's now a free agent. Oh, boy. Anyway.
What else we got?
There's one more thing. You brought it to my attention right before we started recording this article by Bill Barnwell on ESPN.com ranking the 30 deals of the 2019 season, or the ones that impacted the 2019 season from worst to best. There were a couple of honorable mentions in there that did not get ranked, including the Patriots trading for Russell Bodine and the Vikings trading for Kari Vedvik. Vedvik did seem to be the kicker who made the rounds this season.
Yes, he did.
Just didn't stick around. The Duke Johnson trade didn't get ranked. I think there was some impact there.
Absolutely. Him in the passing game as a check down is phenomenal for Houston's offense.
Yeah, so that was just that was just an honorable mention. Deshaun Jackson also just an honorable mention, although I would say he clearly had an impact on the 2019 season. Patriots trading up to get their punter Jake Bailey in the 5th round. Jake Bailey, I mean, that was the Patriots' last draft pick. They went, you know what? We're just going to take the last guy. There's no one else in this draft we want. We're just going to take Jake Bailey.
The game is 1/3 special teams.
That's true. And the Patriots finished in the top 7 among Football Outsiders special team stats in both categories, punting and kickoff, for which Jake Bailey was clearly a key part of. The 30th deal that was ranked was the Raiders dealing for Antonio Brown, and chaos breaks out. To me, honestly, the story of the 2019 season, this is not the 30th trade. Now, impact on the team, perhaps it's the 30th ranked trade, but in telling the story of the 2019 season, this is a top 10 trade. This is a top 3 trade.
I mean, look, it was blockbuster in that, you know, they acquired him. Everyone had the high hopes as far as what was going to happen, how the Raiders were going to look in the during the season, how the offense was going to look. And yet, you know, you look at Hard Knocks, and he barely practiced with the team because of, you know, the cryotherapy gone wrong and various other issues of things being said behind someone else's back. And now he's got beef with Mike Mayock. And, oh, gosh, it's a referendum of what could have been. Look at their Raiders receiving core. I'm not going to say they struggled, but they definitely weren't great. And they had flashes of being good, but they were wildly inconsistent.
Did you have a trade on here that you wanted to highlight?
You know, number 14 on the list, dealing with my squad and the Baltimore Ravens as far as the switch for in the draft to go up and get Andre Dillard, who obviously the Ravens probably were going to draft at their position if they had stayed pat. And the fallout from that, you look at the Ravens then turn around using their draft pick from us to draft Marquise Brown. Philadelphia still has issues at wide receiver. What could he have done for us? And then the fallout from other teams that probably would have drafted Dillard if we didn't jump up and trade him, like the Houston Texans probably would have drafted Andre Dillard if he had fell to them. But just the ripple effect of how things like that just impact the league, just, moving up just to get an offensive lineman and how that changes how teams played out. Of course, littered throughout this list is the various trades the Dolphins made and how those trades impacted every single team a player went to.
Yeah, in a positive manner.
Right. And not to mention, number one on the list was them trading Tannehill during the last year's draft to Tennessee, which obviously the biggest impact. No one's going to argue against that as far as how that changed the outcome of things, because if Tannehill is still a Dolphin or he goes anywhere else, does Tennessee turn it around after the 2-4 start? Because we still agree they would bench Mariota, but with the other quarterback they would have had on their roster, not Tannehill, still quarterback them to a 7-3 record down the stretch and get them into the playoffs.
Number 2 on the list is the Rams trading away Marcus Peters to the Ravens. Absolutely think that was a high impact trade for the Ravens. Certainly improved their defense and fueled that 14-2 record. The Jadeveon Clowney trade is ranked at number 3. I just don't feel like the impact on the season was that big, as both teams seem to move forward. The Texans still seem to do quite okay without Jadeveon Clowney and ended up in the playoffs. Seahawks didn't have Jadeveon Clowney for most of the season or for a good portion of the season due to injury. So the impact there is, yes, when he was there, he was a huge impact for the Seahawks defense, but when he wasn't, it was clear that they needed him. So that could be argued whether that should be a top 3 trade. The Minkah Fitzpatrick trade, again, it's number 4, and the impact he had on the Steelers defense is great, but neither team, again, the Dolphins were considered to be tanking at that point. They did end up winning 5 games by the end of the season without Minkah Fitzpatrick, and the Steelers, while Fitzpatrick was a huge boon to their defense, did not end up in the playoffs. And you could say that there's other reasons for that.
Other factors because of that.
But the point is the impact should have been bigger than what the ultimate outcome was. I don't think you can rank that as number 4.
Well, immediately it was, because I believe that first game he played, he had an interception, forced a fumble, recovered a fumble, and scored a touchdown.
Similarly, you and I were talking about the Pittsburgh move to get Devin Bush and be the Ryan Shazier replacement. That's ranked at number 6, and I would hold the same argument in that the Broncos clearly could have used Devin Bush on their defense. The Steelers were a much better defense thanks to Devin Bush being there in the middle of their linebacking core. But what did it really – how can I tell the story of 2019 without Devin Bush? And I think I can. Like the overall impact to me wasn't that of a top 10 trade.
It makes their defense better, yes, but impactful enough to where it changed the dynamics of what happened in the league, not so much. Things still play out the same way in the AFC as we have them now.
Whereas the number 8 trade, the 49ers get Emmanuel Sanders, to me, that has ginormous impact on the way that the season plays out. Yes, Deebo Samuel was definitely an up-and-coming rookie receiver for the 49ers, but he only got better once Sanders was a part of the team. Now, other teams are scheming against 2 receivers and, of course, George Kittle, rather than scheming for one rookie wide receiver and George Kittle. To me, the impact of Emmanuel Sanders is much larger than some of those other trades that I mentioned. Should be ranked higher. But that's really just nitpicking. Overall, It's a good list to go and check out. and read through, because all of these trades had an impact on the teams that made the trades, whether it was positive or negative. It's just a matter of whether or not you believe it was that overall impact on the 2019 season. And to me, that's just, it wasn't a top 10 trade, but it might have been a top 15 trade, James.
And speaking of top 10, number 10 is my favorite because, it just rubs salt in your wounds. Seattle swapping draft picks with the Patriots to grab DK Metcalf. So considering your wide receiver roles this season and how Seattle has, sometimes struggled previously to get wide receivers the ball, or at least have wide receivers who have an impact on the field, the combination of Metcalf and Lockett this year was crazy. And to have a 6'4" wide receiver go in the second round, and Jiminy Christmas. And trust me, I'm not saying I'm having nightmares, but I still see flashes of him running by our non-existent corners in that wild card game for 160 yards on 8 catches. So.
In retrospect, yes, this trade was much better for the Seahawks than the Patriots. However, even with hindsight being 2020, Chase Winovich and Hjalte Froholt will be two players that will impact the Patriots roster moving forward. Chase Winovich on the defensive side, I think, is a star in the making, and Froholt didn't play at all this season. We'll see if he can make an impact at guard. Joe Thuney is a free agent, along with the aforementioned Ted Karras. So Froholt is probably going to have a prominent role in filling that void on the offensive line. We'll see if he can do it. The other thing is, at the time, the Patriots had drafted N'Keal Harry in the first round. So were they going to take another wide receiver here in the second round? Hindsight being 2020, they should have. But at the time, there was no way that they already had the wide receiver that they liked. But they weren't going to take another wide receiver.
They already knew drafting him, though, he wasn't going to play the first half of the season. So, I know some teams do 2 wide receivers in a draft. One they really like, another one insurance that they think has some upside. Hindsight being 2020, you draft this guy, you don't even make the Sanu trade, which also shows up on this list.
The Sanu the Patriots did not have a good year when it comes to trades. That is for sure. By the way, we've totally skipped over the Browns trading for Odell Beckham Jr. and Olivier Vernon. That was clearly an impact trade that didn't have an impact.
Impact, right. It was supposed to have an impact, just between Mayfield and Beckham Jr., they haven't found chemistry yet.
It fell flat for both teams. So that was an interesting one. The Jalen Ramsey trade is at 13. Anyway, highly recommend you go and check it out on ESPN.com. Bill Barnwell always writes great stuff. And you can argue and nitpick over where these rankings are in terms of the impact on the 2019 season. It all depends on the writer and how you define impact, I suppose. All right, James. I said we weren't going to go 2.5 hours, but guess what? We're pretty darn close.
Close to it, yeah. Yeah.
We're pretty darn close.
I blame you.
Yeah, well, feel free. Quite honestly, the audience loves it because you guys are listening to this podcast more than you have over the last 2 months. So thanks. Tell your friends. Come back and listen to it more. I think the chapter markers, reminding you guys that we have chapter markers and timestamps, certainly helping out too, because you can skip ahead if you've already listened to the playoff previews, or if you don't care about the playoff teams, you can skip ahead to where we're talking about the non-playoff stuff. I think that's certainly been a little bit of an ace in the hole here. Yeah, absolutely. And you know what I also think is helping? The fact that your team is out of the playoffs, so they can't play in the Super Bowl. Everyone's interested in, something new and fresh. Nextfanup@gmail.com is the email address. At NFU Podcast on Twitter, Facebook.com/NFU Podcast on Facebook. We will be back again next week. I don't know what we'll be talking about next week. Pro Bowl! No, we will not be talking about the Pro Bowl. Okay. I know Josh has previously done